We have a major Mitch Marner update from Elliotte Friedman as after months of speculation surrounding Mitch Marner's future in Toronto, his contract negotiations, and trade talks, Elliotte Friedman and Mitch Marner himself has broken the silence on the truth behind these negotiations and what his future looks like in Toronto beyond this season once his contract expires. So to break that down in this episode and discuss what it can mean going forward for the Maple Leafs, as this is going to be one of the biggest questions as the upcoming season, progresses. But stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, about 72% of you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 12,500 subscribers, and it would mean the world if you guys could hit that button for us. But Darius, we have a lot to go over today, and Elliotte Friedman and Mitch Marner, they kind of dropped a bomb. We also have some information surrounding his agent, Darren Ferris. He came out and revealed some more information as well. So tons to discuss surrounding the Mitch Marner situation. Now, we know at this point a trade probably isn't going to happen for Mitch Marner. He's reporting to camp. His season is starting very soon. But the big question mark right now is surrounding his contract. And we got some insight to give you all today. So in a very interesting turn of events this morning / afternoon, a tweet came out and Elliotte Friedman dropped an article giving some very interesting insight and actually gave a report of a meeting, an interview with Mitch Marner, and it said some very interesting things. And they basically asked him about what contract negotiations are going to look like heading into your contract year, obviously, and what things are going to look like, and whether or not he's going to negotiate during the season. And he said, quote, "I don't know if I would say that, but I think for my sake, unless it gets really important or I'm really needed, I'm going to let my agent and Brad Treliving do all the talking and figure stuff out. I'm just going to focus on playing hockey and trying to help this team win games." And that's, of course, Mitch Marner on shutting down negotiations in season, because, of course, we know that it can be a major distraction for everybody involved. And we've said it on the channel that it's probably going to be a pretty big distraction. And his agent also came out and said some other things, which we'll get into in a minute here. But there is a bit of a Freeman bomb earlier in the day today, and some very interesting insights surrounding what's going to happen and how it could be a distraction or lack of distraction, according to Mitch Marner, this upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised that he hasn't ruled that out, like at least in season, right? Negotiations, because I thought, and I still do think that the Leafs want this to go into next offseason, and honestly, probably Marner's camp too. I've said it the last couple of weeks, and I think that that's still exactly what's going to happen. They're going to wait till next offseason to determine, because I think a lot rides on not only this season, but this playoffs coming up in his performance in those playoffs. And you know what? It's pretty interesting too. Like Friedman got that interview, and that was just released this morning. And, Marner said yesterday at camp, "I'm not taking any contract questions. We're not going to talk about it. We're focused on this season." He wants to focus on the season. I understand why he's doing that. But Elliotte Friedman was able to get one question or one answer out of him, which I thought was pretty cool. And a lot of people didn't like that comment yesterday, too, at training camp. The fact that he opened up saying, "I do not want to talk about my contract and the extension this season, and I just want to focus on the regular season and obviously the playoffs." And you know what? A lot of people didn't like it, but he could have went the Steven Stamkos route from last year, where he shows up to camp and says, "We haven't talked about it. I'm mad about it, and now it's a thing." And he didn't do that, so I will give him credit for that. He did not make it a bigger story than it really needs to be. So that's good in itself. And I was pretty surprised that they got an answer out of him, but I still think that this is going to go till next offseason, and both sides probably more likely than not want it that way.
Yeah, at least we got some sort of information that. And again, you can if you read the headline of the article here, you probably can't see it here, but Marner said he wants to be in Toronto for the rest of his career and that he loves it in Toronto. So he's making it no secret that he wants to be in Toronto, and his agent came out and said some things. So Mitch Marner's next contract negotiations appear to already have begun with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Asked about the status of negotiations by The Athletic this week, Marner's agent Darren Ferris responded with the following statement: "To maintain the integrity of ongoing negotiations, it is essential that these discussions remain confidential and are conducted in a constructive manner. As such, we will not be providing public updates on their status at this time." Sounds like a very serious court document the way they're speaking, which I guess it's kind of, to a degree, it is. But at this point, it seems like, and the most interesting part here is the where it says the negotiations have already begun. So Mitch Marner has come out and said he wants to be a Toronto Maple Leaf for the rest of his career. He came out to Elliotte Friedman and said that he's going to let Brad and Darren do the negotiating. There is a world here where an extension gets done before the start of this regular season. Now, I'm not saying that it's a very likely world, but it's certainly more likely than I thought it was a week, 2 weeks, even yesterday or the day before all this report started coming out, because I could see a world where MLSC and I guess Rogers now, and then the Toronto Maple Leafs and Brad Treliving are saying, "Hey, I don't want the team to be distracted by this. We want him on the team. We think with Craig Berube, he can really elevate his game. That being said, it is definitely risky. But if contract negotiations are currently ongoing, they clearly want to keep Mitch Marner around. I guess the question mark is whether that's 10, 11, 12, 13 million dollars, and if they can come to a number that works for both sides. But this is very different than what Darren Ferris said earlier in the offseason, where he's going to 100% test free agency. Clearly, that was just a leverage play to get him either traded at that point or not traded, but kind of done a complete 180 from that quote just a few months ago.
Yeah, I'm sure both parties are starting to kick tires on it, right? Will it get done in season? I don't think it will. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but I don't think that's very likely. But will Mitch Marner remain a Maple Leaf? I think it's a matter of how much money he wants to make per season at this point. I think the Leafs have to have a number in mind, and there's no way they can continue to do the thing that they did with the last administration, which is just give everyone exactly what they've asked for, essentially, right? So they can't do that. They have to have a number in mind that they do not budge off of. If it goes into next offseason, let it be. If he wants to be a Maple Leaf and show that he wants to be a Toronto Maple Leaf, he'll sign for whatever the Leafs can only, budget for that. Obviously, like you mentioned there, that little tidbit too, that Rogers took over Bell's percentage of ownership in MLSC, so not just the Leafs but the Raptors as well. So it makes decision making a lot easier at the executive level. So we're actually going to probably see a lot of changes the next couple of years, right? And that could include Mitch Marner. And if MLSC and the Toronto Maple Leafs, don't want to give him exactly what he wants, then maybe he's going to be forced to walk, or he signs for a little bit less if he really wants to be a Maple Leaf. Now, I see a lot of people saying that we should really support this player, and I don't want to dump on Mitch Marner, and I don't want to hate on Mitch Marner. I just think that, at times, especially in the playoffs, he does not perform, right? And he doesn't come out and, give a performance that an $11 million player should most of the time, right? I do feel that way, and I think a lot of Leaf fans share that sentiment. So it's going to be interesting heading into this playoffs to see what he does, because, with MLSC, changing of the guard a little bit here with management and the executives, maybe they don't want to go that way. It's going to be interesting to see, right? Maybe they don't want to spend 13 million, 14 million. I'm not saying he's going to get that on a player like that who doesn't perform in the playoffs, and maybe they just want to move on. I'm just saying there's a lot of moving parts here now that, the news yesterday makes interesting heading into these contract negotiations.
Yeah, and some other things to go on about that were some comments made by a bunch of different Leafs players. So obviously he's not taking contract talks or not discussing his contract at this time. So I'm going to preface this. So Leafs Mitch Marner on the 2024-2025 question of Stanley Cup or bust. He said, we can't look ahead. That's the problem. You just had to be ready for the ups and downs throughout the season. It's been a fun last couple of weeks, and we're excited for the journey. We are ready to rock and roll. So keep that first quote in mind when I show you Morgan Riley's quote, where he, and John Tavares for that matter, we also have Morgan Riley's coming up. And John Tavares spoke out on Mitch Marner and playing in Toronto. I think he handled it well. Playing here in Toronto, I think it's remarkable. It's tremendous. Everyone is gassing up Mitch Marner, which, I mean, they're his teammates. Of course he will.
He's also a great player, right?
Yeah.
Objectively, he is a great player in the league.
Yeah, a very good player. So we're neither of us are hating on Mitch Marner. Obviously, a lot of fans out there are unhappy with how things went. But they asked Morgan Riley the exact same question. Keep an eye out on how the tone is very different. Morgan Riley was, to a degree, it's Stanley Cup or bust. I think it's how our group feels. Anything short of that will be a failure. but you kind of want to focus on the short term. So for Morgan Riley, Stanley Cup or bust. For Mitch Marner, it is, we can't look ahead. That's the problem. So I know a lot of fans on Twitter and among the Leafs community was a bit skeptical and saying, hey, this is the problem with the Toronto Maple Leafs, is that, Morgan Riley is saying Stanley Cup or bust, which really it should be at this point. If you think about how many years they went without winning a multiple playoff series, they obviously won one a couple years ago. I'm with Morgan Riley on this. Stanley Cup or bust over the next couple years, but this is really the pinnacle year because this is the tipping point now. They're at the top, and if they lose this year, don't make some sort of strides, then you have Marner expiring, you have John Tavares expiring, and things are going to go not downhill necessarily, but in a different direction.
Yeah, if they come out with the same result after this season, let's say they lose in the first round once again, I would suspect that Brendan Shanahan might be without a job in MLSE, right? Because like I just mentioned, there's going to be a lot of changes if things do not change in terms of on-ice product. So I would suspect that might happen. Mitch Marner probably won't be re-signed, right? So there's a lot of moving parts with that. And with Morgan Riley's quote too of winning the Stanley Cup, yeah, I think that's exactly what you want to hear at this point. Like when you look on paper, this team is good enough. We know that they've been, close to good enough the last couple of years. They just haven't been able to get over that hump, and the mental game too. And I feel like with the new coach, there's enough change this year that I feel like there could be, something that pushes them over that hump, and finally they can get to maybe the third round. But you never want to come out in front of the media, especially, or to your teammates and say, you know what, my goal this year is to make the second or third round. It doesn't make sense. Your goal is to win the Stanley Cup. You're good enough. If you're in the playoffs, that's your goal. So I had no problem with that quote. I think that's exactly what you should be striving for, because if they came out and said, our goal is to make it past the first round, I wouldn't feel too confident in that. So I'm pretty happy with that quote. But again, if things don't change, there will be a change, I feel like, after this offseason. Whatever hasn't changed yet will be changed at the
Yeah,
end of this
maybe
offseason if there's no change.
maybe even in the form of Morgan Riley or something like that. So it'll be very interesting to see. Let us know your thoughts on the Riley quote. And of course, all of this Mitch Marner stuff, as it's probably going to continue to linger into the, is definitely going to continue to linger into the season
Yep.
as training camp continues and the regular season approaches. And we're less than a month away. We're about 3 weeks away from opening night against the Montreal Canadiens, and it's super exciting. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news. Thank you guys for watching. See you soon.